Welcome back to the Syncretist Society, everyone. I'm your host, Alex Corey of CultivatedChange.com, here as always with Danielle Rodenroth of SoulMapping.life. As an update from the garden in Asheville, North Carolina, spring is in full effect and everything is popping out of the ground. And this is my favorite time of the year just because you don't have to fight nature quite as hard. So there's not as much of an abundance with weeds, which tends to come in the middle of the summer. But there is an abundance of fresh, nutritious produce, and we'll have more updates of that coming. We just got done with our first true class of the Syncretist Society, going over the types, major facets of human design, and the one thing that popped out and is sort of the fulcrum to me in all of them directly applies to everyone and every dynamic is communication. So today's podcast will be on the dynamics of communication.
Yeah, definitely. So we could go into lots of different aspects of this. And before we jumped on this call, I was like, Alex, what's going on in your life? Sometimes we want to kind of go off topics that we're dealing with in our own lives because it's like fresh in our contemplation. And as we use all of these codes and everything, that's what we're doing on a daily basis, is learning more about our experiences and how to communicate them. So something that's kind of popping up for both of us as well is like the communication, and specifically being able to speak your real truth, your whole truth, and how sometimes we stop ourselves from communicating certain things for fear of being challenged or being controlled or confrontation or upsetting the other person or different things like this. Mm-hmm. There's tons of reasons why we don't communicate enough. And I think this is really important because we can clear out a lot of frustration and resistance and distortion in our lives when we could just be honest and not have that fear of, if I say how I really feel, right, then this is going to cause a problem, right? And how we can go into things with confidence, and that no matter how the other person reacts, that we'll be able to maintain our own integrity and to have a graceful interaction with the other person so that we can actually bond, that we can come to an agreement or an understanding, and at the very minimum for ourselves, feel good about how we handled a situation, and that we were true to ourselves. Yep. In that aspect. So I've had a few things even this week, mm-hmm, where I've had to address things directly. Yeah. And in the past, when I was growing up, and I've always been big into communication, not always the best at it. I was, as a child, more reactive, mm-hmm, and maybe kind of blunt, sharp tongue at times. And just kind of grown over the years to realize that you can almost always have like a win-win situation, yeah, even if there's a problem, even if there's like you're unhappy or disappointed or things like this. And it just takes communication, yeah, to be able to resolve the issues. And a lot of us, we think, I'm communicating. Yeah, I'm communicating. But in reality, the other person may not really know. And if you haven't actually brought it up or ask the other person, well, how do you feel about this situation? So I'll give a quick example. I've hired a dog trainer to help with my very vocal, communicative dachshund, who barks.
Oh, we have a baby dachshund.
Yes, we do.
In the podcast today. This is
Boreas. He's the baby.
He's adorable.
Yes. So I hired this dog trainer, and it was our third session. It's not cheap to hire like a personal dog trainer. And just certain things were not going the way that I thought that they were going to go. Alex and I kind of made an analogy or metaphor that it's kind of like hiring a personal trainer but never going to the gym.
Yep.
Or actually working out.
Do something. Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of communication, but not a lot of actual training. Right. So I realized that, okay, I need to communicate, because the last session I had, I was disappointed and I slept on it. And, realizing that this person owns their own business and taking them into consideration, giving them the benefit of the doubt, but then also needing to clearly communicate my feelings. So I called him the next day. Conversation went great. We were both like, wow, we're so proud of how we handled that. I told him exactly how I felt. And we set up a new plan for how to continue the training. And one of the things that he stated to me as well is like, thank you for communicating.
Yeah.
Right. And I told him straight up, I was like, I'm disappointed. Right. And I feel that this was how things were going to go and we're not really going anywhere, things like that. And I tried to be graceful about it. But, going into it, I was like, oh, is he going to be defensive? Mm-hmm. Is he going to like get an attitude with me? All the things that we think about that a lot of times prevents us from just being direct or being clear with someone about what we really feel. And in those moments, I just realized, okay, I just need to, without blame, shame, or guilt of myself or the other, communicate directly so that we can come to a solution, right, together. And that is how I've been dealing with my relationships for a while, even with my family. Like a lot of my family relationships have improved, kind of using this method of not accusing or blaming, but still being direct and honoring my true feelings and contemplating that before I communicate and not withholding my communication for fear that they're going to, whatever pattern I think that they're going to have, right? Because it shouldn't matter what trauma or patterning we've had in the past with when we communicate our truth.
Yeah.
Right? We should still continue, even if the person's going to freak out. Like, it's still our job for ourselves to honor ourselves and to say the truth.
A couple of underlying things under communication that I think, unless we actively work on these aspects, they kind of just simmer. So assumptions and anticipatory anything, like you said. So
reactions.
We have to give people the benefit of being able to have an actual communication. And even if the last one we had wasn't great, we have no idea what they've gone through even since our last communication, and maybe this will be like talking to an entirely different person. Mm-hmm. So not assuming anything, having active listening and reflective listening. So making sure you are both using the same terms, same definitions, and under the same framework of where you're going. And then, actually saying what you mean so that you have solid footing to actually negotiate on, opposed to other people guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Assumptions, I think, and or better way to put that is not leaving anything to implicit guesswork.
Right.
That ruins so many things. Just, I thought you meant when you said this. So that's the hammering down precision of verbiage in the moment so that you can actually move forward, which is probably would shorten confrontation in most communication by weeks.
Right.
Yeah, if you actually move forward on solid reality instead of going around things and working with small distortions. And if you can hear the motorcycle in the background, there's a car maintenance next to us, so apologize for that, but life happens.
Yeah, so I sometimes think of communication or having conversations or confrontations or anything like that like we're both painting a painting. And so as we're each communicating our vantage point, our perspective, what we feel, hopefully in an objective but clear way, we're painting our side of it. And together, when we're communicating, we're both trying to figure out what the painting actually is.
Right.
So if both people are on board with that and and say one person isn't, we can even communicate and communicate in that way and say, hey, look, we're trying to have a solution together. We're trying to find out an understanding because obviously emotional energy and traumas and all of those types of things can hinder our communication. So having patience and even understanding of the other person in that situation.
Right. And a lot of times what happens is if you try to chat or communicate about communication and someone doesn't have the patience or most people just want to get to a point.
Yeah.
And it's not getting to the point correctly so that everyone is on the same understanding and operating under the same definitions. They just need resolution. So a lot of people don't like that weaving in and out. They don't like the negotiation. Right. They just want conclusion, finalization, to have, just for it to be over. A lot of people don't like the actual process of communicating. Either they have a hard time articulating themselves or have had probably terrible experiences in the past of not being heard. Right. Maybe have developed something of how to sort of push their will a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dominating. Yeah, that's a really good point too, and we'll probably do a call on that too, just about like learning how to articulate yourself as well, because it is a skill. Like communication is something that is a skill, and even in human design, communication is meant to be not mind directed, actually. The mind is here to put pressure down, and it is a computer that we can use to kind of formulate things, but it's not like you think about it and then say it, right? Like even as we're communicating now, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I use the mechanisms and the pressure to articulate correctly, and that in itself is like a neural pathway that you have to unlock, and there is a way to do it to where you can communicate your truth and how you actually feel in a way where you're actually communicating what you want to say and not just shutting down because you feel like you can't do that. I've experienced that with myself and people as well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, you mentioned shortcutting earlier. So I used to do this in relationships where I wouldn't say anything because I thought I knew exactly what the other person was going to say. I was right most of the time. This happens in long-term intimate relationships. Or if what you are going to say doesn't leave the other person anything to change, or you can't foresee. Basically, you're trying to be two people at once, and you're playing a chess match in your brain. And if you don't see an outcome, you just won't say anything. I used to do that. That's not at all the way to do that. I now understand, because every person is their own person, and you have to treat people with autonomous decision. So they may not pull from the experiences that they've had, so you have a very finite representation of someone you're communicating with, and we always try to shortcut and just anticipate, just so as a defensive mechanism, or I do that at least, just to sort of foresee what might be coming. But that's not having a real conversation, because you're putting someone else in a very finite box and almost dictating speech around where you want it to go, instead of having an open communication,
right?
Which is how reality should work.
Just putting it all out on the table, and
it's scary.
I was just gonna say, having more courage, to be in your truth and truly speak what you feel after you've felt it through and contemplated and weeded out all the trauma yourself. Because a lot of times when we're deciding if we're gonna communicate something to someone, or we have to confront them about something, like this dog trainer, right? I had to sit within, kind of process it out and just kind of feel it out as to what I wanted for a desired outcome, and it happened exactly actually how I wanted it to happen, where no one's left the conversation feeling like shit, right? That we both have a better understanding, the connection's deeper, both of us were extremely truthful and direct, and it felt good. Both of us felt really good. He even messaged me after and was like, wow, thank you so much. And that's the ideal outcome of even when you have to confront someone. And even if it doesn't happen that way, you still need to go into the confrontation, which confrontation, we need to take out the connotation of that being bad, right? Confrontation is just directly approaching something, right? It's like something is being called to confront. We need to confront this. And start looking at it as an opportunity to connect and an exercise in being your true self. And each time you do it, you feel a little better. You feel more confident in how you're speaking. Even when you get challenges, you feel okay with being able to hold your own and hold yourself in that. And almost kind of being like a teacher in the conversation, but not in a condescending way.
Right.
But as an example, like you being yourself, being graceful, trying to articulate the best you can your experiences and what you truly feel. And that's kind of empowering the other person that they can also be open. Right. Because being vulnerable, for some reason, is scary. And it makes us feel like we're not strong, but actually when you do it, you feel very empowered. And it's like, I don't even care that I just shared something super humiliating. I was like really articulate with how I wanted to say it and what I really felt, and I just was raw about how I felt. And wow, that feels good. You know.
And a lot of people don't do that because they've had past traumas or negative experiences with those types of situations. But even if you bring that up, not specifically what happened, but just be like, I've had these types of conversations and I'm hesitant because of.
Right.
The other person might ask you a deep question like, would it be better if I framed it this way? Like, you're still trying to get to the same result. So at the end, as long as both people have no hidden questions left in their psyche, or like, I should have said that, or I wonder, all of that should be put on the table. Right. So the more vulnerable you can be, like you said, the greater depth of detail and understanding you both will come to. And that's what I think it comes down to, is learning how to see from someone else's perspective in negotiation and still try to come up with win-win situations.
Yeah, totally. And I like what you said earlier about the autonomous decision-making, right, for everyone. And what we've talked about in the past podcasts about conditioning and conditioning others and, like, us being conditioned and all of that, living our lives knowing that if we're our true selves, even if it's going to affect the other person, right? Like, so let's say I say something that's very truthful and the other person I'm telling it to, they might withdraw themselves, or they might leave, or something in my life might fall apart. Like, if it's your truth, you need to say it, even if your world crumbles, right? It's like staying in as truth in a sea of lies, right?
Yes. Right.
All of that is what is most important, and just gaining the skills. So, especially this week, practice and notice for yourself, like, where are you withholding communication? What are you not speaking, and why? Like, why aren't you communicating certain things? And maybe start to take those little steps, when you're in a conversation or when you're in those moments, again, depending on your strategy. So unless you're a manifester, everybody else needs to kind of do it out of response or when it's recognized.
Which is the hardest thing. Just because of conditioning. Right. Because most in communication courses, or just anything in professional life or adulthood, is don't be afraid to put yourself forward. So it's always initiation. Right, which is the exact opposite of what, I still do that. So especially if you're more introverted, like I was, it took a lot of practice on getting rid of the fear of rejection. So even just entering into a conversation, new dynamics are new. Everything is raw. Something catastrophic to your ego could happen. There's infinite potential, and that unknown is scary. So a lot of practice in communication involves getting rid of the fear of rejection. So just initiating all the time, and then just from the law of averages, getting desensitized to whatever anyone says, it works for being for not being afraid of communication, but it doesn't help you communicate better. Right. Yeah, and that kind of brings up a good point too. When we think about, like, acceptance of, like, as long as I'm myself, I accept whatever is going to come out of that, right? So, and sort of a little bit of a detachment in a sense, but not in the way that we mostly think of it. Yes. It's more like I'm committing to the moment, to my truth, and whatever comes from that, I accept, right? So if this person walks away from me, if this person's mad at me, I'll still do my best to try to communicate, but using my authority and my strategy to navigate, I know at that point, well, that person maybe
it's time for us to separate, or it's time for us to move to different locations, and or we shouldn't be in business together, or whatever the case may be. But I find this most helpful in like family dynamics as well, because we all have interesting family dynamics. And I've been able to do so much like with my family in a way where it's like I feel a lot better and healed around a lot of that. So yeah, knowing too, like not needing to placate people.
Yeah, there's a phrase that in coaching, and this is extremely helpful for just communication and interpersonal dynamics in general. It's high attention, low attachment. As in, give the conversation your full presence and attention and have no attachment to the outcome. Right. Which is very difficult if you're in business partnerships or just anything where it matters, where you want a specific result. But if you do that, like you said, whatever happens will be correct.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that even brings us back to like with even human design, the point of existence and all of this, and kind of surrendering to the vehicle and not like imposing the mind. And because I know I was super self-conscious for a long time too, especially about like my communication. Even like inside I felt like I had a lot to say, but it, like you said, the fear of rejection or people aren't going to understand me and those types of things. And you actually can build up more with the practice of doing it, to where you do feel more confident about yourself, and you start to just accept that, okay, whatever comes out of this is going to be, and surrendering to the vehicle and not trying to impose so much control with the mind, because I think that that's where the manipulation and things come from, because we're trying to control our life. And so we do that through communicating or withholding communication. And we had to pause because he forgot something because he drank caffeine. Now we're back.
Caffeine after 2:00 doesn't serve me well. I'm right on the border. So I found better communication if you feel that someone may not be as vulnerable as you are, and you give them, if you just ask a question and you notice a lot of resistance, hesitation, or that they don't know how to respond to it because it's going to involve a little bit too much personal context, I've started giving people options of the way to frame it. Be like, did you mean this way? Or when I had this happen, I interpreted it as this. So giving people the framework that my brain comes up with, perspectives that I will see, like 3 or 4 different ones, short, they don't have to be, and someone will latch on and be like, yeah, that one. The way you put that one. Right. And that, if you've just had a lot of practice kind of digging through your own psyche and then trying to articulate that, someone else might not have had that mindful awareness practice or just the introspection and know how their brain works through things. So if you give them the way your brain works through things or your concerns, basically just relate how you would feel in that situation. Right. Yeah, it takes the pressure off, right? Yeah. Because you're like, oh, they've done this already, right? Yes, I'm feeling exactly that. Yeah, way. Right. Yeah, it's not personal, like you always say. Yeah. Yeah, in all communication, there's so many ways to try to find the connection, try to find the truth, and even in the most, seemingly ugly situations or disastrous problems that we might have to conversate about, it can actually be a beautiful thing that comes from it, even if things have to end or there's just something terrible that you need to talk about. Those can actually be some of the most rewarding moments that you actually were able to find that connection and the solution, and at least just understanding on both sides. And from there, everyone's on the same page. We're both vulnerable and we are open and honest and just look, this is what I'm dealing with. And, you get a lot of reward just from that. And it's healing the soul. It's heals your spirit and helps you just feel more whole because you were honest with yourself. Right. So, yeah, there's lots of different ways of communicating and finding that connection that we all want to explore and move through. So,
look at your communication tactics, your stories that you tell yourself in your self-talk about maybe even how you perceive things with people or the assumptions, and just go into it with, I don't want to say not a care, because there's definitely lots of passion and desire and care there, but just a commitment to yourself, and you'll surprise yourself with what happens.
And it's perfectly okay and even beneficial to inform people of how your day's been prior to communicating. So I'm usually tired at the end of the day, and I'm not my best self because I've just blown through a ton of energy. So if you go into a conversation, if you're going out and hanging out with friends at night or anything, and you know you're not your perky, usual chipper self, and someone may think you're angry at them, just go into the conversation being like, I didn't sleep well last night, it's been a long day, so if I come across as crass or cold, it's not you.
Right.
I'm just not my best self. And just laying that foundation will take away a whole bunch of implicit assumptions about people draw just from facial features, and if they're actually listening, we'll be able to tell a whole bunch of things about your communication.
Your state,
your state. And it takes out a lot of that assumptions about your personal relationship. If it's just you've had a terrible day, just say, it's been a rough day. I apologize if I sound bitter or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tuning into yourself, right? First. Thank you. It reminded me of something I wanted to say too, because when it comes to being able to articulate how you really feel, that might be an issue, right? Like, where do I start? Like, I don't even know. I'm just having these feelings and I haven't processed yet. And maybe you're in a moment, maybe you're being confronted by somebody else, and you can easily say, I don't know what to say right now. The words aren't coming to me.
Right.
I am having a lot of feelings, but I'm not really sure what I feel. And, so you can even just communicate at the most basic, like, what is going on right now inside of you, or like, oh, I'm getting a headache, or, I'm starting to feel angry. I'm feeling anger inside, so you can even just communicate, just identifying the certain things that a lot of times we don't even think to mention,
right?
Because we're so worried about, like, well, I've got to come back with a statement that this or that, or defend myself, or try to bargain, or do this or that. And it's just about each person tuning into themselves and being vulnerable in that space and being honest from that space. And you can even say, I don't think I can articulate what I'm feeling. I don't even know how to say it. I can't find the words. Well, guess what? You're already doing it.
Right.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah, and it makes it a little easier if instead of, this is something that I've run into all the time, if you can't relate, if you actually don't know what the other person's going through, don't try. Sometimes in communication, people just want to be heard.
Yeah.
So if someone's telling you something, especially if it's vulnerable, raw, or just, you can tell that there's an emotion behind it.
Yeah.
There's something moving behind it. You don't need to say, yes, that's happened to me as well. So you just took away from their story and made it yours.
Yeah.
So if they're expressing it and it's helping them, just ask curious questions.
Right. Yeah.
You don't need to relate, because as soon as you relate, then it's partly your story and you just took part of their story away. So you can just help them express their feelings, and there will be a pretty finite that felt good, and you'll see a little release from the other person usually.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Just listening helps most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And you could also say thank you, thank you so much for opening, and thank you for sharing that. And maybe not giving advice all the time, or like you said, trying to relate, even though that can be our attempt to connect.
It can, but it can also sound like you're not special. That happens to other people.
Right.
That's the other way. If someone's in that weird headspace, that can easily be interpreted as yes, I get it, but you're not special.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of times we're just communicating these things because we want to feel understood. Yeah. And a lot of times the understanding alone is what solves the problem, right? It solves the issue because we have a deeper understanding of each other and how we feel, and like things can naturally solve themselves from that. There may need to be more conversations, but a lot of times just calling out the elephant in the room can bring everyone to the same page. We're looking at the same picture. We've painted it together, and now we can hang up the picture together and deal with it. So yeah, practice that. Look at your close relationships. Look at your friends, your boss, your coworkers, your business partners, whatever it is, and start taking some steps this week to just be more honest about what you feel. When someone says, "Hey, how are you doing?" Be honest, right? And just start to get the timing and the flow and what it feels like to be truly honest and not what is expected by the norms or society or the rules. Just be an example of being direct and honest and open.
Yeah.
So
that's it for this one, everyone. We are actively having classes for Syncretist Society. I had our first one today, like I mentioned. If you do want to delve into any of this in greater detail and learn
the mechanics
of everything, communication, existence,
relationships,
interpersonal dynamics, everything that touches your everyday life, the links are always down below. Subscribe to the newsletter if you'd like future communication, and we appreciate it if you would like the video, give us a thumbs up, and hit the subscribe button.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.